Story 1. The Devil from Hollow Creek. Location: Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia. Approximate year: 1962. The first thing we found in the abandoned settlement was the well. Not the houses, not the church, not the graves, the well. It had been filled in by hand with stones, dirt, broken boards, and pieces of furniture, packed so tightly that no water could be drawn from it again. People abandon homes for many reasons: floods, disease, work drying up. But people do not destroy their only clean water source unless they are certain they never want to return, or unless they are trying to keep something from coming up. This happened in the early summer of 1962 when I was 26 years old. I was a junior field assistant with a geological survey team sent into a remote section of the Allegheny Mountains in West Virginia. Officially, we were there to assess mineral deposits near Hollow Creek. Unofficially, nobody told us much. We had maps, radios, pack animals, field equipment, and 8 people in the party. Dr. Warren Hayes was the lead geologist. Paul Avery was our medic. Mr. Rollins was a company security man, though nobody explained why a survey crew needed security that deep in the woods. There were 2 survey assistants, myself included, and 2 women who handled the camp kitchen and supplies, Helen Moore and Ruth Harlan. Our guide was Everett Klein, a local mountain man with white beard, huge hands, and an old lever action rifle he carried as naturally as another limb. Everett knew the ridges, the creek beds, the old logging trails, and, most importantly, the places people avoided. On the 4th day, we reached one of those places. The settlement sat in a shallow valley between 2 wooded ridges. 6 or 7 houses stood there, most of them collapsed inward. A brick chimney rose beside a sunken foundation. Farther back, half hidden by trees, stood a small white church with no steeple. The door hung open. The cross above it had not fallen. It had been taken down. You could still see the pale shape where it had once been nailed to the wood. Everett stopped at the edge of the clearing and removed his hat. Dr. Hayes asked what the place was called. Everett took a long time before answering. New Mercy? Was it a company camp? No. Church folk, hard shell people, kept to themselves. Mr. Rollins laughed. What happened? They get tired of being holy? Everett did not smile. They left? When? Few years back, maybe 10. Why? Everett looked toward the trees behind the church. They said something came out of the woods. Paul gave a short laugh. What kind of something? Everett put his hat back on, the kind they called devil. That made the men laugh. This was 1962. We were men of maps, radios, steel canteens, geological hammers, and government forms. Nobody wanted to admit that an abandoned church and an old man's superstition could make him uneasy. Only Everett did not laugh. He walked to the filled-in well, looked down at the sealed mouth of it, and said, They filled it themselves. Dr. Hayes had planned to camp in New Mercy, but without a working well, the place was useless. Everett said there was a creek about 1.5 miles east through the timber, reached by an old footpath from the settlement. Before we left, I stepped inside the church. The pews were still there. A few swollen hymnals lay on the benches. There was no altar cloth, no Bible, no cross. But on the wall behind the pulpit, someone had scratched words into the white paint. Most of the message had been ruined by mold. Only one line remained. The child was not taken by God. I stared at it too long. Then Everett appeared in the doorway. You don't want to stand in there too long, he said. Why? because places remember what people did in them. He looked toward the well, then said, "Let's get water." We followed the path to the creek and made camp on a small rise about 200 yards from the water. By sunset, the tents were up, the mules were tied, and Helen and Ruth had supper going. Nothing strange happened at first. Stories like this never begin with thunder. They begin with beans warming in a pot, men arguing over tent stakes, smoke in your eyes, and somebody complaining that the coffee tastes like creek mud. After we ate, Helen and Ruth kept working. There were pans to scrub and water to haul. Ruth took a load of dirty pans down to the creek. Helen stayed in camp for a few minutes, then followed with another pot and 2 tin plates. I remember seeing her disappear between the trees. She was humming. That was the last normal sound I remember from that evening. About 15 minutes later, Helen came back alone. She was walking fast. Not running, but close. "Ruth isn't there," she said. Dr. Hayes looked up from his map. "What do you mean?" "She's not at the creek. Maybe she stepped into the brush. I called her. Maybe she didn't hear." Helen swallowed. "The pans are still there." We all went down to the creek. Ruth's pans were stacked on a flat stone beside the water. One had been half scrubbed. A rag floated near the bank, caught on a branch. There was no blood, no torn clothing, no sign she had slipped, no struggle we could see. Everett crouched near the bank and studied the mud. Then he moved slowly into the trees. He did not call Ruth's name. He only looked at the ground. After a minute, he stopped and lifted something from a low branch. It was Ruth's blue headscarf, torn at one corner. Then he pointed to the ground. There were tracks in the soft dirt, but they were wrong, almost human in length, but twisted outward sharply, as if whoever made them walked with both feet turned wrong. Only one toe showed clearly on most prints, a small, bent toe pressed deep into the mud at the outside edge of the foot. No boot pattern, no claw marks, nothing that matched a bear, a cat, a dog, or any man I had ever seen. Everett followed the tracks 30 yards into the woods, then looked back at us. "Something carried her." Paul said, "That's impossible." Everett pointed again. There were no prints from Ruth's shoes leading away from the creek, only those twisted marks. Whatever had taken her had lifted her off the ground. By then, the light was failing. We armed ourselves with rifles, flashlights, and 2 hand-cranked lanterns. We searched in pairs, calling Ruth's name until our voices sounded thin and useless among the trees. The tracks vanished on dry ground beneath the hemlocks. After dark, Mr. Rollins fired once into the air and ordered everyone back. Nobody liked leaving Ruth out there. Nobody argued. We built the fire high. 2 men stood watch with rifles. Nobody slept. Helen sat near the flames, wrapped in a blanket, her face white and empty. Dr. Hayes kept checking his watch as if time itself had become evidence. Paul whispered that Ruth might have had a seizure and wandered off. Everett said nothing. Sometime around midnight, Everett suddenly lifted his head. The rest of us went quiet. For several seconds I heard nothing. Then I heard it too, a soft dragging sound from the old path. Dry leaves. A pause. Dry leaves. A pause. We moved toward the path with the lanterns raised. At first I thought someone had left a bundle of clothing in the dirt. Then Helen screamed. Ruth lay on her back. Her dress was dirty but not torn. Her face was blue-gray and fixed in an expression of sudden terror. Her mouth hung open. Her eyes had rolled upward beneath the lids. Across her forehead and cheeks were dark streaks, as if someone had touched her face with filthy fingers. Paul checked her pulse. He knew before he touched her but he went through the motions anyway. "She's dead." "What killed her?" Dr. Hayes asked. Paul checked her neck, arms, and the back of her head. No wounds. "What killed her?" Paul looked again at the dark marks on her face. Her heart stopped. "Can fear do that?" Paul closed Ruth's collar. "Not like this." Nobody said what we were all thinking. Something had taken Ruth from the creek, carried her into the woods, and then brought her back. Not dragged her. Brought her, like a child returning something it had broken. At dawn, Dr. Hayes reached base by radio and reported a death. A helicopter was promised if the weather held, but it would not arrive before noon. Until then, we had to remain in camp. We also needed water. Dr. Hayes chose Frank and me to fill the buckets. Frank was the older survey assistant and had served in Korea. He carried a rifle. I carried the buckets. Helen was ordered to stay in camp. She refused. "Ruth's things are still down there," she said. Dr. Hayes told her that did not matter. Helen looked at him with eyes that did not seem fully awake. She would not leave another woman's things in the mud. Finally, he allowed her to come, but only if she stayed between Frank and me. We reached the creek without incident. The morning was still. Too still. No birds, no squirrels, no insects, only water moving over stone. Helen knelt near the flat rock and began gathering Ruth's pans into a canvas sack. Frank stood behind us, facing the trees. I filled one bucket, then the other. That was when Helen stopped moving. Her eyes were fixed on the brush across the creek. "What?" I whispered. She raised one shaking hand and pointed. At first I saw only leaves. Then the leaves blinked. A face was watching us from between the branches. I cannot describe it cleanly. If I call it a man, you will imagine a man. If I call it an animal, you will imagine an animal. It was neither, and somehow both. The skin was black with dirt. Hair hung in ropes around its head and shoulders. The nose was wide and flattened. One side of the face seemed heavier than the other, as if the bones beneath it had been made wrong. Its eyes were small, human. That was the worst part. Helen made a sound, not quite a scream. The face disappeared. Then the branches moved. One long arm came through the leaves, the hand opening toward Helen. Maybe it meant to grab her. Maybe it meant nothing at all. Frank did not wait to find out. He raised the rifle and fired. Something heavy crashed down on the other side of the creek. Frank chambered another round and crossed the water. I followed him. We found the thing 10 yards into the brush. It was dead. Frank's shot had struck it high in the chest. It lay twisted on its side, naked except for scraps of rotted cloth tied around its waist. Its arms and legs were bent strangely. The fingers were thick and curled, the nails long and black. The feet were the same ones that had marked the mud by the creek, turned outward, malformed, with one small outer toe pressed lower than the rest. Human feet, but not like any I had ever seen. Helen began sobbing. Frank whispered, "Jesus Christ." When the others heard the shot and reached us, Everett was the only one willing to get close. He crouched beside the body for a long time. Then he stood and looked toward New Mercy. Dr. Hayes asked, "What is it?" Everett answered carefully, "A man." Paul examined the body and agreed. Male, human, severely deformed from birth, likely feral, possibly living in the forest for years. That became the beginning of the official explanation. Not the whole explanation, only the beginning. Frank kept saying the same thing. It came at her. I thought it was going to take her too. Nobody argued. We had all seen the hand reaching through the brush. Dr. Hayes used the radio again. This time he reported 2 bodies. When the helicopter came shortly after noon, Ruth was taken out first. Helen went with it and never returned to camp. The pilot refused to take the second body until the sheriff and coroner had seen it where it fell. So the dead man was left near the creek, under a tarp, weighted with stones. That detail stayed with me. Ruth was treated like a person. He was treated like evidence. By late afternoon, 2 deputies, the coroner and Sheriff Marlowe, reached the camp on horseback, with Everett leading them in from an old logging road. Marlowe questioned Frank first, then me, Dr. Hayes, and Paul. Frank told the same story each time. The thing came through the brush, reached for Helen, and he fired once. The sheriff did not arrest him. "This county has enough trouble without charging a man for protecting a woman in the woods," he said. The coroner later listed Ruth's death as cardiac failure brought on by severe fright. No wounds, no injuries sufficient to explain the death. The dead man was carried out the next morning on a mule litter. His death was recorded as a gunshot wound to the chest. Unknown male. No identification, no next of kin, no charge filed. By the end of that week, he was buried in the county cemetery outside Webster Springs, in the section for unknowns. A number was placed on the marker, not a name. That was what they did with his body, but that was not the end of him. The sheriff's men searched the woods for 3 days. Less than half a mile from the creek, they found a crude shelter under a rock overhang. Inside were rabbit and squirrel bones, old blankets, a rusted pot, a cracked enamel cup, and a weathered child's wooden toy. There were also pieces of women's clothing, not enough to prove anything, but enough to make every man there go quiet. Everett found a bone comb tucked between 2 stones. He held it for a long time. Then he said, "Abigail Cole." The sheriff looked at him. "You know that name?" Everett nodded. "I heard it when I was a boy." That was when the old rumors took shape. Abigail Cole had lived in New Mersey before the settlement emptied. She was young, unmarried, and pregnant. Some said the father was a close relative. Some said one of the elders had forced himself on her, and the congregation covered it up. Some said she went into the woods willingly and came back changed, and that the child had not been fathered by any man. Everett did not claim to know the truth. He only said Abigail disappeared before the child was born. Months later, people began seeing something at the edge of the settlement. A bent figure, a crawling shape, a dirty boy watching from the trees. The people of New Mersey said the devil had come to collect what belonged to him, but Everett did not fully believe that. That boy was not what drove them out, he told me later, standing near the filled-in well. That boy was what they left behind. The deputies searched the church last. Behind it was a small fenced cemetery. Most graves were ordinary. Families, old people, children taken by fever. But behind the church, outside the cemetery fence, beneath a collapsed section of boards, they found another marker. It was not stone, only blackened wood. At first we thought it marked an adult grave. Then the deputies cleared the brush and saw how small the mound was. Too small for a grown person. Too small even for an older child. The sheriff ordered 2 men to dig. Less than 2 feet down, they struck a little wooden box. Not a coffin. A box. Inside were no bones. Only a strip of decayed cloth, a lock of pale hair tied with thread, and a page torn from a church register. The ink had nearly vanished, but the coroner read part of it. Male child, born to Abigail Cole, not baptized. The name line had been cut out with a knife. On the marker above the box, 3 words had been carved deep into the wood. Born in sin. The sheriff said the grave proved the story. Everett said it proved something worse. They buried his name, he said, not his body. Nobody answered him. But I thought about it. A child born wrong, a mother hiding in the woods because the people who should have helped her chose shame instead. A congregation building a fake grave so they could pretend the problem had been buried. A boy growing up among roots, rocks, animals, and scraps. And then I thought about the well. Everett said it had been filled the same week Abigail disappeared for good. Not the week she left the settlement, the week she stopped being seen at all. Some claimed she came back one last time after dark, carrying the child and begging for food. Some claimed the elders turned her away. Some claimed she stood by the well until morning. By dawn, she was gone. After that, people heard a woman crying near the water, then a child, then something deeper beneath both voices. Within a month, the families of New Mercy began leaving. Before the last wagon went over the ridge, the remaining men filled the well with everything they could carry. Maybe they thought they were sealing away a sin. Maybe they were trying to keep the boy from coming back for water. Or maybe they heard something under the stones and understood that the boy was not the worst thing in that valley. The official report said none of that. It said Ruth Harlan died of heart failure after being frightened by an unidentified feral man. It said Frank fired in defense of another crew member. It said the abandoned settlement contained evidence that the unidentified male had lived in the area for years. It said nothing about Abigail Cole, nothing about the false grave, nothing about the writing in the church, nothing about the well, and nothing about Ruth's face. That bothered Paul most. Before we left, I found him sitting alone near camp. Ruth had 4 marks on her face. He said, "I know." "Like fingers." "I know." I counted his fingers twice. I remembered the dead man's hands. 3 fingers on the right, 2 on the left, twisted and wrong. Could he have made the marks anyway? I asked. Paul shook his head. Not those marks. Sheriff Marlowe overheard us. People see patterns after a shock, he said. Paul did not argue, but when the sheriff walked away, I saw Paul look toward the old path, then toward the well, as if he was trying to decide which explanation frightened him less. The next morning we were ordered to leave. The survey was suspended. Officially, the area was unsafe because of a death, an armed incident, difficult terrain, and possible public attention. Unofficially, nobody wanted to spend another night near Hollow Creek. Ruth was gone. Helen was gone. The dead man had been carried out. The sheriff had taken the register page, the lock of hair, and the strip of cloth from the false grave. Before we left, I walked back to New Mercy. The church stood open. The pale shape of the missing cross showed above the door. The filled-in well sat at the center of the settlement. For the first time, I noticed that the boards and stones inside it had settled lower than before, only a few inches, but enough to leave a dark gap near the rim. I stared into that gap. From somewhere beneath the packed earth, I thought I heard water, not flowing, not dripping, breathing. I stepped back. Everett came up beside me. "Don't listen too long," he said. I turned to him. "What was really here?" Everett looked at the well. "I told you. The boy wasn't what drove them out." "Then what did?" He took off his hat. "I don't know." That was the first time Everett admitted not knowing something. It frightened me more than any answer could have. When we finally left Hollow Creek, I looked back from the mule trail and saw New Mercy through the trees. For 1 second, I thought someone was standing beside the filled-in well. A tall, dark figure. Too tall to be Frank, too thin to be Dr. Hayes, too still to be any man. It did not have the bent shape of the dead man from the creek. It stood straight, almost formal, as if it had been waiting there long before we arrived and would remain long after we were gone. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was a stump, a burnt post, a shadow, anything else. Years later, I heard that a logging crew tried to cut a road through that valley. Their equipment failed twice. One man broke his leg. Another swore he heard a woman crying near the creek at dusk. A third quit after finding a child's handprint in fresh mud beside the old well. The company abandoned the route before winter. As far as I know, New Mercy is still out there. The church is probably gone by now. The houses too. Maybe even the well. But I would bet anything the path to the creek remains. Some paths do, even when nobody living has any reason to walk them. And some places do not become empty when people leave. They simply become habitats for what remains after the people are gone.
Story 2, The Dog Beyond the Fence. Location, Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Approximate year, 2015. The first time my son fed the dog, he told me it took the food with its hand, not its mouth, its hand. The following afternoon, I opened the pasture gate because the animal seemed to want me to follow it. That was the mistake. This happened during Christmas week in 2015. I was 32 years old, living in Milwaukee with my husband Mark and our 7-year-old son, Mason. I had been asking Mark for years to spend a holiday with my grandmother Evelyn, who still lived alone outside Iron River in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Evelyn's farmhouse stood near the end of a county road that narrowed into a single plowed track through the woods. She had a detached garage, a propane tank, and 3 acres of unused pasture. Beyond the pasture was forest, spruce, birch, cedar, and long stretches of swamp that froze solid in winter. Mason had never seen snow that deep. When we arrived in Mark's Ford Expedition, the banks beside the driveway were almost level with the hood. The house was small, but warm. Grandma Evelyn heated it with a wood stove and ran the electric furnace only at night. She had a landline, an old television, and a generator in the garage that started only when it felt like it. Cell service disappeared several miles before the property. The first 2 days were completely normal. We cut a small balsam near the edge of the land, decorated it with lights Grandma had owned since the 70s, and ate far too much food. Mason spent most of his time outside. The backyard was enclosed by an old livestock fence made from wire mesh and wooden posts. Grandma had stopped keeping goats years earlier, but the fence remained. A narrow gate beside the garage opened onto the pasture. The tree line began roughly 400 yards beyond it. On the afternoon after Christmas, I went outside with Mason while Mark helped Grandma carry firewood from the garage. The light was already fading, though it was only around 3:30. I noticed Mason talking to something beyond the gate. At first I thought one of Grandma's neighbors had walked over. Then I saw the dog. It stood on the far side of the fence, chest deep in loose snow. It resembled a border collie mix, mostly white with brown and black patches along its back. A dark mark surrounded its left eye, giving it the appearance of a permanent squint. A faded blue collar hung around its neck. It did not bark. It did not wag its tail. It simply watched Mason. "Don't touch it," I called. Mason turned toward me. "He's hungry." "You don't know that." "He told me." I assumed he meant the dog looked hungry. When I approached, the animal stepped backward, keeping several yards between us. It looked healthy. Its coat was thick, and its ribs were not visible. I figured it belonged to a hunter or someone living farther down the county road. Dogs sometimes traveled miles through those woods. I went inside and returned with 2 pieces of sausage. Mark was at the kitchen table, pulling off his gloves. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Feeding a stray." He gave me a look. "Don't let Mason get close to it." "I'm not." The dog watched me through the fence. I held 1 piece through the wire. "Come on." It lowered its head, but did not approach. I tossed the sausage into the snow. The dog looked at it, then back at me. It made no attempt to eat. "See?" I told Mason. "It isn't hungry." "It's scared of you." I gave Mason the second piece and told him to keep his hand on our side of the fence. He crouched near the lowest gap in the wire, holding the sausage flat on his palm. The dog remained still. I looked away for only a few seconds because Mark called from the doorway. Then Mason laughed. "He took it!" The dog was already moving toward the trees. It did not bound through the snow the way a normal dog would. Its body seemed to slide forward while its back remained almost level. A narrow trench followed it toward the forest. I watched until it disappeared. Inside, I made Mason wash his hands. Grandma was upstairs resting, and we did not mention the dog to her. I asked Mason whether it had taken the sausage with its teeth. He shook his head. He picked it up. With his mouth? No. He extended his arm, spread his fingers, and slowly brought them together as if picking up a coin. "Like that." Mark smiled. "Dogs don't have hands, buddy." "I know," Mason said. He sounded so certain that Mark's smile faded. The dog returned the following afternoon. It appeared at nearly the same time, standing beyond the fence in the gray winter light. This time, I noticed it before Mason did. The blue collar was still around its neck. Something metallic hung from it, but the animal would not come close enough for me to see whether it was a tag. I took several slices of turkey from the refrigerator and went outside alone. Mark was in the garage, trying to get Grandma's generator to turn over. It had coughed once that morning and died, and he did not trust it. Mason was inside with Grandma, drinking hot chocolate. The dog watched me approach. "Where did you come from?" Its ears moved slightly. I held up the turkey. The dog looked at the food, turned toward the forest, and walked several steps away. Then it stopped and looked back. It repeated this twice more. Walked toward the trees, stopped, looked back. It seemed to want me to follow. At the time, I thought there might be an ordinary explanation. Maybe its owner had fallen in the woods. Maybe a hunter was injured beyond the pasture. I told myself I would only walk a short distance. I removed the chain from the gate. The hinges gave a sharp, metallic squeal. The dog became completely still. Its head turned toward the sound. For a moment, it seemed less interested in me than in the open gate itself. I stepped through and pulled the gate closed behind me, though I did not replace the chain. The dog waited until I was about 50 yards into the pasture, then continued toward the forest. Walking through deep snow exhausted me quickly. After 100 yards, my legs were burning and sweat had gathered beneath my coat. The dog moved without effort. Near the tree line, one of its front legs broke through a layer of wind-packed snow. The animal pressed the paw against the crust and pulled itself free. The joint bent downward, not the way a dog's leg should bend. For 1 second, I saw several long digits spread across the snow. They tightened separately, gripping the surface like fingers. Then the animal looked directly at me. The dark patch around its eye made the face seem almost familiar, but the eye inside that patch was too focused, too aware. I stopped walking. The dog turned and moved toward the first row of trees. I did not follow. I began walking back toward the house. After several steps, I heard Mason behind me. "Mom?" I stopped. The voice had come from the forest. "Mom, wait." I turned around. The dog stood between two spruce trees. Nothing else was there. "Mason!" The animal tilted its head. Its mouth remained closed. Then Mason's voice came again. "Come here." I ran back to the house. The real Mason was in the kitchen with Grandma Evelyn, drinking hot chocolate. Mark came in from the garage just as I shut the back door. "What happened?" he asked. I told him the snow was deeper than I expected. I did not mention the voice. Not yet. Before going fully inside, I returned to secure the gate. The turkey slices I had dropped were gone. There was a single clear print in the snow on the yard side of the fence. 4 long digits spread from a narrow central pad. A 5th, shorter mark pressed into the snow along one side. It looked like a hand with a thumb set too low. I had never seen the animal pass through the gate. I photographed the print and covered it before Mason could see it. That evening, after Mark took Mason upstairs to get ready for bed, I showed the picture to Grandma Evelyn. She stared at it for a long time. "Where was this?" "On our side of the pasture gate." "Did you open the gate while it was watching?" "Yes." Her expression changed. "How long was it open?" "Only a few seconds." She stood, checked the back door, and pulled the curtains closed. "Put the chain back on it." "I already did." "That may not help now." I asked what she meant. Grandma sat across from me. "Animals jump fences. They dig beneath them. They don't stand outside waiting for a person to open a gate." "You've seen that dog before?" "Not since I was 13. In the winter of 1958, Grandma's younger brother, Caleb, was 9 years old. A dog began appearing outside the same pasture fence. White coat, dark markings, blue collar, a black patch around the left eye. Their father assumed it belonged to a logging crew. Caleb fed it scraps every afternoon. The dog avoided adults, but allowed him to approach. After about a week, their mother heard scratching on the porch late at night. Then she heard Caleb calling from outside. The real Caleb was asleep upstairs. Their father searched the property with a shotgun, but found only unusual tracks near the fence. He wrapped a chain around the gate and locked it. The old brass key normally hung from a nail in the kitchen pantry. Caleb knew where it was. Before sunrise, he took the key, unlocked the gate, and disappeared. More than 50 people searched the property and surrounding woods. The sheriff brought tracking dogs, but they refused to follow the trail beyond the pasture. Searchers found one of Caleb's boots near a frozen creek. They also found a line of prints entering the woods. Some resembled dog tracks. Others looked like bare hands pressed into the snow. Caleb was never found. Neither was the brass key. Afterward, Grandma's father installed a heavier gate and kept it chained every winter, until he died. "Why didn't you warn us?" I asked. "Because it hadn't returned, in almost 60 years. She looked at the photograph on my phone. "For a long time, I thought I remembered it wrong. Children change things in their minds. Families do, too." She looked toward the stairs. "But that is the same print." I asked whether she believed the dog had taken Caleb. Grandma folded her hands on the table. "My father believed it could not cross a boundary until someone on the other side opened it." "You believe that?" "I believe Caleb opened the gate, and we never saw him again." I told her about hearing Mason's voice near the tree line. Then I called Mark downstairs and told him everything. He believed very little of it at first. Then he saw the photograph of the print and Grandma's face. He wanted to leave immediately. By then, snow was falling hard enough to erase the driveway. The county did not plow that road after dark, and Grandma said the low section near the swamp would already be drifting shut. We agreed to leave at first light. Until then, nobody would go outside. That night, the temperature dropped below 0. Shortly after midnight, the power failed. The generator turned over but would not start, so we lit kerosene lamps and kept the wood stove burning. All four of us stayed downstairs. Mason slept on the couch between Mark and me. Grandma sat in a chair facing the back door. At 2:15, something stepped onto the porch. A slow, scraping sound moved across the boards. Then came the faint jingle of metal against metal. Grandma looked at me. Neither of us spoke. The sound stopped outside the back door. A few seconds later, Mason's voice came from the porch. "Mom?" The real Mason was asleep beside me. "Mom, I lost my glove." Mark pulled Mason closer. The voice continued, "Open the door." Grandma crossed the room and pushed a kitchen chair beneath the doorknob. The voice stopped. For almost a minute, the house was silent. Then something began walking around the exterior wall. Soft steps moved through the snow. They passed beneath the kitchen window and stopped near the living room. Mason opened his eyes. He looked toward the dark glass. "He says you already let him in," he whispered. I sat upright. "Who?" Mason did not answer. 3 slow scratches moved down the window, not the frantic clawing of a dog. 3 controlled strokes. Then nothing. We remained awake until sunrise. In the morning, Grandma and I checked the yard, while Mark stood on the porch with Mason behind him. The gate was still chained. A thin layer of fresh snow covered the lock and latch, proving that neither had been touched overnight. There were no tracks crossing the pasture, but several feet inside the gate, a line of hand-like prints began in untouched snow. They led directly to the porch. Years earlier, a neighbor had helped Grandma mount a cheap trail camera on the garage because deer kept eating her shrubs. It faced part of the yard and porch. Mark removed the memory card and put it into the work laptop he had brought with him. At 2:13 a.m., the camera had photographed an empty yard. The next image was nearly white with static. In the third, something dark stood beside the porch railing. The photograph was blurred. Its lower body could not be seen, and the head might have belonged to a large dog. One front limb rested against the rail. The end of it was lost in shadow, but the limb appeared to wrap partly around the wood rather than rest on top of it. The following picture showed an empty porch. It was not a clear photograph. It would never have convinced a stranger. It convinced us. We left as soon as the county plow opened the road. Grandma came with us and never spent another winter in the farmhouse. The following spring, she sold the property to an older couple from Green Bay who wanted a seasonal hunting cabin. Before signing anything, she told them that her brother had disappeared from the pasture as a child. She did not explain the rest. She only asked them not to remove the old gate if they could help it. She also gave them my phone number in case anything unusual ever happened on the property. They agreed. For several years, nothing happened. Then, in November of 2021, I got a call from the woman who had bought the farmhouse. Her husband had died the previous winter. She still owned the cabin, but her adult daughter and granddaughter had begun using it during school holidays. That summer, they removed what was left of the livestock fence. The posts had started leaning, and the rusted wire looked dangerous for a child. A week before Thanksgiving, the woman said the same dog had started showing up near the old pasture. She did not say the dog had come back. She did not know enough to say that. But I did. White coat, brown and black markings, a faded blue collar, a dark patch around the left eye. She said it had been sitting where the old gate used to be, watching her granddaughter play near the garage. It did not growl, it did not bark, it only sat in the snow, still as a yard ornament. The woman asked if Grandma Evelyn had ever owned a dog like that. I looked at Mark from across the kitchen while I listened. Then the woman said something that made me cover the phone with one hand. "She says it had something hanging from the collar," I whispered. Mark stood up before I finished the sentence. I put the phone back to my ear. "What was it?" I asked. The woman on the phone was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's actually why I'm calling?" The next weekend, a small padded envelope arrived in our mailbox. Inside was an old brass key. The woman had included a note. Her granddaughter had found it in the snow where the old gate once stood. It had been lying on top of the fresh powder, clean and dry, as if someone had placed it there only minutes before. The key was dark with age. Its square head was worn smooth at the edges. 2 shallow notches had been filed into one side. Mark and I drove it to Grandma Evelyn that same afternoon. She was living with my parents by then. She was 81, and she had stopped pretending she might move back to the farmhouse one day. When I placed the key in her hand, Grandma did not speak for almost a full minute. Then she turned it over with her thumb. "My father made those cuts," she said. "What cuts?" I asked. "These." She touched the 2 notches on the side of the key. "So, he could tell it from the shed key in the dark?" Mark asked if she was sure. Grandma closed her fingers around it. "That was the pasture gate key." Neither Mark nor I said Caleb's name. We did not have to. It was the key he had taken from the kitchen pantry on the morning he disappeared. The fence was gone. The gate was gone. But after 63 years, the key had come back. And the worst part was that I knew keys were not returned unless something expected a door to be opened.
Story 3. The Little Man Beyond the Split Hemlock. Location: Pisgah National Forest, North Carolina. Approximate date: May 2026. The creature in the grass was no taller than a child. Short brown hair covered its body, but its face looked almost human. Old, wrinkled, curious. For several minutes, it watched me meditate without making a sound. Then I reached toward it. It grabbed my wrist with both hands and pulled a 6'4" man off his feet as though I weighed nothing. When I broke free, it vanished into the forest with my meditation beads and the GPS-enabled smart ring it had torn from my finger. For the next few minutes, I watched the ring's locator signal move deeper into the mountains. Then that disappeared too. This happened in May of 2026. My name is Evan. I was 37, single, and working as a network security engineer for a hospital system outside Asheville, North Carolina. I had not been drinking or using drugs. The retreat was alcohol-free, and no one had brought anything stronger than coffee. I was also familiar with the outdoors. I had spent years hiking and camping in western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, and northern Georgia. I knew how bears, raccoons, coyotes, and injured animals could look in poor light. What I saw that evening was not an animal I recognized. There were 8 people in our group, 4 men and 4 women. Maya, our yoga instructor, had organized the weekend retreat. Her assistant Daniel handled navigation, food, and emergency equipment. The other participants were Brooke, Nina, Tessa, Marcus, Leo, and me. The campsite lay 2 miles beyond a gated Forest Service road in Pisgah National Forest. A broad meadow opened between the trees, with a creek along its eastern edge and a small waterfall about 200 yards downstream. The nearest houses were miles away, and the surrounding ridges blocked most road noise. Maya and Daniel had inspected the place twice before bringing us there. Daniel carried maps, bear spray, a medical kit, spare batteries, and a satellite communicator. We each carried a flashlight and an emergency whistle. The hike in took about 40 minutes. The abandoned road was overgrown, but easy to follow in daylight. Young trees grew through the old tire tracks, and shallow streams crossed the path. One section had collapsed toward a rocky drainage, forcing us to stay close to the inner bank. Farther on, we crossed a narrow wooden footbridge, darkened by moisture. Neither obstacle seemed dangerous that morning, but both would matter later. The meadow itself felt safe. An old stone fire ring stood near the northern edge, while hemlocks and dense rhododendron formed a wall around the clearing. We set up 4 tents, secured the food between 2 trees, and arranged 8 yoga mats in the grass. Our first practice began in the cool morning light. The second around noon was longer and more physical. During the afternoon, Brooke and Nina walked to the waterfall. Marcus and Leo gathered firewood with Daniel, and I read beside the creek. Nothing unusual happened. The place felt quiet rather than threatening. After dinner, Maya led the final group session as the sun moved behind the western ridge. We finished with slow breathing exercises and several minutes lying in the grass while the creek moved past us. By the time we sat up, the meadow was already filling with evening shadow. Then Maya suggested 20 minutes of individual meditation. She told us to remain near the meadow, the creek, or the waterfall. Everyone set a timer, and Maya said she would also ring a small brass bell. Brooke, Nina, Tessa, Marcus, and Leo chose the waterfall. Maya sat beside the creek. Daniel stayed near the tents. I followed the others at first. The waterfall was only about 12 feet high, but the water struck the shallow pool with enough force to fill the ravine with noise. Mist hung over the rocks, and the last light made the pool look silver. It was beautiful, but 5 people were already finding places along the bank. Even after they stopped talking, I could hear boots scraping stone and jackets rustling between the trees. I wanted complete silence. When I returned to the meadow, Maya was already sitting beside the creek with her eyes closed. Daniel was arranging firewood near the stone ring. I told him I was looking for somewhere quieter. He pointed to a narrow path behind the northern edge of camp. "It loops back toward the old road," he said. "Stay on the main trail and don't go past the split hemlock." He told me to return by 7:40, even if I could not hear the bell. I showed him the offline map on my phone and started recording my route. Around my right wrist was a loop of pale wooden meditation beads. On my left index finger was a black smart ring. It monitored my heart rate, sleep, temperature, and activity. It also had a recovery mode designed for hikers. If removed suddenly, it could transmit short GPS packets to the paired phone through a low-power beacon for about 15 minutes. In open terrain, the signal could travel several hundred yards, but mountains and heavy vegetation made it unreliable. The ring fit tightly. In warm weather, I usually needed soap or cold water to remove it. That detail matters. I entered the trail at about 7:22. The sound of the waterfall faded as the path climbed between hemlocks and walls of rhododendron. A few minutes later, I passed a large tree whose trunk divided above the ground. The split hemlock. I should have stopped there. Just beyond it, a smaller path descended to the right into a shallow hollow. The campsite was still less than a quarter mile away, and I told myself I would walk for only another minute. The side path curved through mountain laurel and opened into a clearing no larger than a living room. Low grass covered the ground, surrounded by trees that formed an almost perfect circle. A fallen hemlock lay along the western edge, its trunk silver and smooth from years of rain. Beyond it, the rhododendron grew so densely that I could not see more than a few feet between the branches. The clearing felt strangely separate from the rest of the forest. The waterfall had become only a low murmur. No birds called from the canopy, but at the time, I interpreted the silence as peaceful. At 7:28, I set my phone to vibrate at 7:40 and placed it beside my right leg. I sat near the fallen tree, removed the beads from my wrist, and began repeating a simple mantra while passing them through my fingers. The ground smelled of warm soil, damp leaves, and old bark. After several minutes, my breathing slowed and the tension left my shoulders. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, something was sitting 15 feet away. At first, I thought it was a stump. Its color matched the leaves and bark behind it. Then it moved its head. The figure was tightly folded, with its knees drawn against its chest and 2 thin arms wrapped around its legs. Short brown hair covered most of its body, but it was not thick fur. It lay close to the skin, and in several places I could see dark flesh beneath it. Its shoulders were narrow, and its elbows projected at sharp angles. Then it raised its face. Its eyes were large, yellowish-brown, and widely spaced. They did not shine like the eyes of a deer, raccoon, or bear. They focused directly on mine. The face looked almost human, but not young. The skin around the eyes and mouth was folded with wrinkles, as if I were looking at an elderly man reduced to the size of a child. It had a narrow nose, flat ears, and thin, dark lips. The creature did not seem angry or frightened. It watched me with quiet curiosity, as though it had found me first and was deciding what I was. For a moment, I thought Marcus or Leo was playing a joke. Then I saw the proportions. Its arms were too long, its shoulders too narrow, and its wrist joints unusually large. I considered a bear cub until I saw its hands. Each had 4 long fingers and what appeared to be a small thumb resting across its knees. No bear could sit that way. I should have left. Instead, I closed my eyes again. The creature had not threatened me, and part of me believed the fading light and meditation were distorting something ordinary. I expected it to be gone when I looked again. I repeated the mantra several times and opened my eyes. The creature was now 6 feet away. I had heard nothing. The grass between us was dry, but it had crossed half the clearing without making a sound. From that distance, every detail became clearer. Wrinkles surrounded its eyes and wide mouth. Brown hair covered its forehead, cheeks, shoulders, and arms, while the lower part of its face was nearly bare. Its long fingers rested across its knees, each ending in a thick, dark nail. It tilted its head to the left, then to the right. Its eyes moved from my face to the beads passing through my fingers. The attention was too deliberate to feel animal. It seemed to understand that the sound and the movement belonged together. I stopped reciting. Its eyes narrowed, and its head leaned forward. I began again. The creature relaxed. My phone vibrated beside my leg. Its head snapped toward the sound. I considered taking the phone and leaving, but I silenced the timer without looking away. That decision kept me there after 7:40. I was afraid, but I was also fascinated. The creature seemed intelligent. It appeared to be studying the sound of the mantra and the movement of the beads. I lowered them into my lap. The creature followed them with its eyes. For one irrational moment, I wondered whether it might be a person with a severe deformity, someone living alone in the forest. That explanation made no sense, but it was easier to accept than what I was seeing. "Are you okay?" I asked. The creature blinked. A faint clicking sound came from the back of its throat. I shifted into a crouch. The beads remained looped around the fingers of my right hand. The creature did not retreat. I moved closer until less than 4 feet separated us. If it had stood upright, it might have been 3 or 4 feet tall. Its torso was small, but its arms extended below its knees. The wrists and finger joints looked too large for the rest of the body. Its hands were narrow and bony, with thick, dark nails that looked more damaged than clawed, like the nails of someone who had spent years digging through hard soil. It smelled of wet leaves, old wood, and something faintly metallic. The creature leaned back slightly. The skin of its throat moved rapidly as it breathed through its nose. It appeared nervous, but not aggressive. That was what convinced me I could offer my hand without frightening it. I raised my right hand, palm upward. The beads hung loosely around my fingers. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then its expression changed. Its eyes narrowed. Its lips pulled away from small gray teeth, and it hissed. Both hands closed around my wrist. The strength in them was impossible. It pulled once, and I fell forward. My knees slid across the grass, and my left hand struck the ground. I tried to jerk my arm free, but the creature pulled again. My chest hit the grass, and it began dragging me toward the fallen hemlock without ever standing upright. I was 6'4" and weighed more than 200 pounds. I had both feet behind me and one hand digging into the soil, yet it moved me as easily as someone pulling an empty sleeping bag. I shouted and dug my left hand into the ground. The beads began sliding over my right knuckles. I rolled sideways and kicked, but my boot passed over its shoulder. The creature released one hand from my wrist and grabbed my left palm. Its fingers closed around my index finger and the black smart ring. Its face was less than 2 feet from mine. The pupils expanded until only thin amber circles remained around them. The clicking in its throat became faster. One thumb pressed against the edge of the ring, then it pulled. Metal scraped across my swollen knuckle. Pain shot through my finger. At the same time, its other hand caught the meditation beads. One end struck the ground, while the rest remained trapped between its fingers. I pulled both arms toward my chest with everything I had. One of its nails cut across my right wrist. I twisted and pulled again. My hands came free. The ring scraped over the last joint of my finger. For a fraction of a second, I saw the black band between the creature's fingers. It still held the wooden beads in its other hand. I rolled backward and stood. The creature raced toward the fallen hemlock in a low crouch, using both its arms and legs. I saw a brown shape pass behind the silver trunk. I reached the tree less than 2 seconds later. Nothing was there. Rhododendron crowded the edge of the clearing. Several branches trembled, but I heard no movement beyond them. The creature had disappeared. 4 shallow scratches crossed my right wrist. My shirt was covered with mud and grass, and the ground showed a flattened line where I had been dragged. The beads were gone. So was the ring. The skin around my left index finger was red and torn. I picked up my phone and opened the ring's application. Because the device had lost contact with my skin, recovery mode had already activated. A marker appeared on the downloaded map. It was not beside me. The first confirmed packet placed the ring about 40 feet beyond the northern edge of the clearing. Another point appeared almost immediately, then a third. The application updated only when a packet reached the phone, so the marker froze and then jumped farther north. It did not follow the side path I had used. It moved directly through the thickest vegetation. 40 feet became 90, then 150, then 220. The first 4 positions had relatively small accuracy circles. They formed a clear line up the hollow. The first and fourth points were about 180 feet apart. Their timestamps were 6 seconds apart. Whatever carried the ring had crossed more than half a football field at roughly 20 miles an hour, through rocks, fallen trees, and mountain laurel thick enough to slow an adult to a crawl. The signal vanished. The screen read, "Waiting for recovery beacon." Several seconds later, another packet arrived farther upslope. Its accuracy was weaker, but the center point was still moving in the same direction. A later update appeared beyond a line of exposed rock, almost 300 yards away. I looked toward the ridge and saw no movement, no shaking branches, and no possible route through the laurel. The marker vanished again. One last packet placed it near the lower ridge, nearly a quarter mile from the clearing, but the error circle was enormous. The position might have been wrong by hundreds of feet. Even so, every reliable point before it had led away from me. Then, the application displayed, "Recovery signal lost." I knew GPS could drift beneath heavy tree cover. Part of me still hoped the creature had dropped the ring nearby and the distant positions were wrong. I searched the grass and beneath the fallen tree, but found neither the ring nor the beads. The light was fading fast. A branch moved beyond the hemlock. I left. My phone showed 7:58. I followed my recorded route toward the main trail. Several times, something moved through the vegetation beside me. When I stopped, it stopped. When I walked, it continued. Once, I heard the same clicking sound close behind me. That made no sense. The locator showed the ring moving north, away from camp. The clicking came from behind me as I traveled south toward the meadow. Either the GPS positions were wrong, or the thing following me was not carrying the ring. Then I heard 3 blasts from an emergency whistle. Maya later told me she had rung the brass bell at 7:40. When I did not return, the group gathered near the trail. At about 7:50, She began repeating the emergency signal. "Daniel called my name," I shouted back. The movement beside the trail stopped. Daniel and Marcus met me near the split hemlock with flashlights and bear spray. When they saw the blood, dirt, and torn skin around my finger, they asked what had attacked me. "I don't know," I said. Back in the meadow, Maya cleaned the scratches while I drank water and tried to stop shaking. My left index finger was swollen, and the skin around it had been scraped raw. I told everyone what had happened, including the clicking sound on the trail, and showed them the saved locator positions. The final updates had large margins of error, but the first 4 formed a clear line. Daniel enlarged the map, checked the timestamps twice, and compared them with the slope on his paper map. He could not explain how the ring had traveled 180 feet in 6 seconds across that terrain. Marcus suggested a sick bear cub. Leo suggested a person with a severe deformity. Neither explanation accounted for the hands, the face, or the strength. We discussed leaving immediately, but complete darkness had settled over the abandoned road. The route crossed the collapsed drainage and the damp wooden bridge. With 8 tired people carrying tents and packs by flashlight, there was a serious risk of a fall or someone becoming separated. My wounds were shallow, but I was shaking badly. Maya wanted to watch me for signs of shock, and Daniel did not want the group scattered along 2 miles of dark trail. Whatever had followed me seemed to stop near the split hemlock, and we had seen nothing enter the meadow. Maya used the satellite communicator to report our location and tell the studio's emergency contact that we would leave at first light. She asked them to contact the Forest Service if we failed to check in by 8 the next morning. We moved the tents closer together, placed the medical kit and bear spray in the center, and kept 2 people awake at all times. Daniel and Marcus took the first watch. Leo and I took the second, though I doubt I slept for more than a few minutes before it was my turn. Nothing entered the camp that night, or at least nothing we saw. Every snapping branch made us turn toward the trees. I checked the ring application repeatedly, but the beacon never returned. At dawn, Daniel, Marcus, and I followed my GPS track back past the split hemlock and down the side path. The clearing looked smaller in daylight. The grass was flattened where I had been dragged, and marks from my hands, knees, and boots remained in the soil. Near the fallen tree were several shallow impressions, but none was clear enough to identify as a footprint. The ring was still offline. Its early coordinates pointed north, but the later error area covered hundreds of yards of steep forest. Daniel would not lead us beyond the clearing into terrain he and Maya had never inspected. We searched for more than an hour. We moved through the grass on our hands and knees, checked beneath the fallen trunk, and followed the edge of the rhododendron without entering it. Daniel compared every visible mark with my route from the night before. Marcus searched the place where the creature had first been sitting. There was no sign of the beads, no sign of the ring, no sign of the creature. We returned to the meadow, packed the camp, and reached the vehicles before noon. Maya sent a second satellite message confirming that we were safe. On the way back to Asheville, we stopped at a Forest Service ranger station. At first, I described the attacker only as a small unidentified person or animal. Then the ranger asked for details, and I told him the truth. Brown hair, long arms, human-like hands, and the face of an old man. He recorded it as a possible encounter with an injured black bear or an unidentified person. He also checked for missing children, lost hikers, and escaped patients. Nothing matched. 2 days later, the ranger called. A Forest Service employee had walked the northern trail and reached the turnoff shown on my GPS track. He had not entered the steep area beyond the clearing, because the slope was unstable and the rhododendron nearly impassable. He found no camp, clothing, food wrappers, or other evidence that anyone had been living there. He also found no ring, no beads, and no tracks that he was willing to identify. The scratches healed within a week. The injury around my index finger took longer. The ring application preserved the data recorded before the device disappeared. My heart rate had been normal at the beginning of the meditation. The final reading transmitted while the ring was still on my hand was 168 beats per minute. That did not prove what I saw. It only proved that something in that clearing terrified me. The recovery history remained in the application as well. Most of the later coordinates were marked unreliable because of the canopy and bridge. The first 4 were not. They began just beyond the fallen hemlock and continued in the same direction toward the northern slope. 180 feet. 6 seconds. Across rock, fallen timber, and rhododendron dense enough that an adult would struggle to walk through it. I checked the timestamps so often that I memorized them. I also searched online for GPS drift, beacon errors, and anything else that could create a false trail like that. I found explanations for isolated jumps. I never found one for 4 accurate points moving in sequence. I have never returned to that part of Pisgah National Forest. I still practice yoga. I still meditate outdoors. But now I remain where other people can see me. And before I close my eyes, I look carefully at everything sitting in the grass around me.